Hello and welcome to Talking Automotive with Mark and John. I'm Mark Palavestra and my co-host John Sinclair. Hello, John.
Morning, Mark. Good to talking to you again. Today we've got our guest Steve Short, Senior Executive out of the car rental space, and he's brought across a lot of really good insights into the rental business. And what was interesting for me, just listening to him, is what are the opportunities that come out of that, and what can be applied across to automotive.
Yeah, Steve comes to us with a really strong background in car rental. He's held two directorships here in Australia in the rental space. He's worked for an OEM at General Motors, and he's well known in the fleet leasing business with fleet management organisations. So well qualified to give us some good information on this in this very important area of the car rental. Steve really came across with some fantastic information on what the dynamics of the industry, challenges with COVID, and the opportunities going forward. So he's got some really good stuff for OEMs, dealers, and customers.
So Steve, welcome, and thanks very much for joining us on the show this morning. It's good to have you on board. Mark?
Yes, great to have Steve here. Steve is a industry professional with a very, very diverse background. But when we look at Steve, your career started in fleet management, back with Custom Fleet and the early forerunner to SG Fleet. You moved to government fleet with DAS, which was the biggest organisation for fleet management in conjunction with Macquarie. And you also spent time in OEM land, in the car side of things with General Motors. But very importantly, you've held two directorships at Hertz and most recently Thrifty Rent-A-Car here in Australia. So Steve, thanks for joining us. And we're very keen to hear what you've got to say about what's happening in the car rental business and also the effects it has on the overall auto business as well. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, John.
Yeah, Steve, it's really interesting getting a good understanding of the rental market in Australia. So maybe to start with, can you just give us a quick overview of what the Australian rental market looks like?
Yeah, thanks, John. The market currently would comprise the major players being Hertz, Avis Budget Group, Red Spot Enterprise, Europcar and Thrifty. They comprise around 100,000 units nationally, comprised of franchise locations and corporate locations. Probably a split 50-50. It depends by operator on how that split would be. You know, my experience with Thrifty, you'd have 60% of that would come from the franchise network, 40% from the corporate network. That would change amongst Hertz and Avis just depending on their networks. And they would account for somewhere around, I'd say 30 to 40,000 units per annum sold into the new car market.
And in terms of the customer profile, what is the main use of those vehicles?
Well, we certainly focused on four profiles, and that would be the corporate segment, the leisure segment, what we call the third party and wholesale segment, and then the auto clubs. And we had a very good split that would be around about 25% each in those segments. That corporate split would make up your government, your mining, insurance replacement work, and then your general business work. The leisure market traditionally comes from the leisure, domestic, international traveller. Wholesale and third party that we refer to would be the international inbound markets and the aggregator markets like rentalcars.com or Vroom 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 that return business to each of the operators. And the last segment we had was auto clubs. So auto clubs make up a lot of domestic tourism. And that's primarily through partnerships with the majoring auto clubs around the country and discounts to their members.
And the types of cars rented by these customers and the rental periods. So is it a day in, day out where they come in, they rent it for a day and then go? Or what sort of cars do people rent? And then how long do they normally rent them for?
Well, there's been a big shift in the last 4 years from the full-size vehicle through to the compact car class. And in the last 2 to 3 years, the small to medium SUV market. And it is different among the markets. So if you look at insurance replacement work, you're generally looking for a compact car just to keep someone mobile while their car's being repaired. To then go to the leisure market where if you're driving an SUV at home, you typically want to pick an SUV up when you go and rent interstate. for your holidays. You've got your family, you're familiar with an SUV. It is the market, is the biggest selling market segment in the country now. And it's predominantly would be the biggest segment within car rental now is that SUV and that small, medium size SUV market.
So would it be fair to say when European travellers come in, they expect a small car? When you get, say, North Americans coming in, they'd expect an SUV, yeah. And domestic travellers would expect an SUV.
Yeah, typically, Mark. Big change. If we went back 5-6 years ago, you'd always hold a small manual in your fleet, and that would be to assist those passengers coming through from the European markets. Typically now we would only buy automatics in that market, but we would still have the small vehicles sitting in that segment, and you have to cater for the North Americans coming through with their larger style SUVs and our own markets here with our small, medium SUV markets.
Okay, and rental periods, how long is the average rental?
So average would be about 4 days to 4.5. Depends by segment. If you went to an insurance replacement rental, you're probably looking around 9 to 10 days length. If you're looking at a leisure traveller, it could be a week's length. The business travel's 1 to 2 days, perhaps 3 days if you're on a longer trip.
And so airport rental is different to rental franchisee rental?
Absolutely. So in franchise land, you have a combination of light commercials and medium commercial vehicles, your moving vans for weekends with the tailgate lift. You've got your passenger fleet there as well. Primarily there to service the local community or the insurance replacement work that they would have. Whereas your airport rentals, if you look at an airport, and Sydney Airport's a prime example, you may have 300 pickups on a Monday morning before 12 o'clock. You have a similar amount on Tuesday, a similar amount on Wednesday. By Wednesday evening, you're out of cars. And then, then they start returning on the Thursday, on the Friday. And then you're looking to sell them for the weekend for the leisure traveller that's coming through for the long weekend or coming through to visit family. So it's quite amazing to watch the yard that's full on a Monday morning to be empty on a Wednesday evening.
That's amazing. So if you need an urgent rental on a Wednesday night, you'll be paying a premium for it.
More than likely, supply and demand would dictate that, Mark. But if you're looking for one on a Saturday morning, you'll probably get a reasonable rate.
Good to know.
So there's a fair amount of planning in the whole process to manage your stock and get the vehicles out that you're making, so they can make some sort of profitability on it.
Absolutely. So the planning's probably the primary thing behind the profitability of a rental car organisation. If you're not looking out 6 months to see what's happening, you're not looking at the demands, or you're looking at events that are coming through, and you plan your buying and you're selling around those events, then you'll miss that market.
So would it be fair to say, Steve, that aeroplanes control, in other words, flights control how much tourism rental there is, and to a lesser extent, business rental, but in franchisee land, it's crashes and people moving house and logistics rentals that are more of a impact to that business?
In reasonable summary, yeah. The airports, for a corporate location, if you're running an airport, it would bring predominantly 80% of your work. The franchise land, absolutely, they're looking at their insurance replacement, the moving house on a weekend, to the local business, to perhaps some of the larger corporates like an Australian Post or someone like that needs a replacement vehicle for a vehicle that's in for service. Or just a need for a short period of time. We look at periods we're in now with COVID-19, and the demand for those 3-ton moving vans with the tailgate lifters is immense. And that's part of the market that hasn't slipped during the COVID period.
Steve, as automotive guys, we're really interested in the acquisition and disposal of vehicles. And can you tell us a little bit more about how the rental companies go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it all starts in your planning phase and what sort of volume you're going to expect throughout the next 12 months, 18 months as you plan. And it works off rental days. So if you know your rental days, you should be able to plan your fleet to it. You generally know what fleet you've got and what fleet's going to come off. So then you look at what you're purchasing. You need to look at your rental demand by car class. You need to look at the period of keep that you got to keep those vehicles. And then we go to the market, to the manufacturers to see what's on offer. Now, typically you buy at risk, you buy on a lease, or you buy on a buyback. In New Zealand, they call that future purchase options. And you just try and mix your fleet so you get your optimum holding costs to keep the vehicle fleet at its lowest you possibly can to deliver a safe, efficient motor vehicle to the customer in the car class of their choice.
And Steve, what's the sort of percentage breakdown between those groups, between the buyback and the...
So if we went back to the early 2000s, it would have been 90% buyback. If you look at it today, it's probably 5% buyback in Australia, if you're lucky. And most of those buybacks are only transacted through dealer or dealer groups and not the manufacturer these days. New Zealand's slightly different in some of the importers still participate in their future purchase options. But here in Australia, we're predominantly risk or going down that operating lease path.
So why would risk be better than buyback? I would have thought buyback would be a nice safe option. You know your costs and it's locked in.
It is true, you know your costs. There is also an inherent cost when you return the vehicles and the standard that vehicle has to be returned in. I predominantly like risk because risk affords you opportunity to upflex and downflex as you need to. If you're stuck with a buyback and it's due back on a certain date, it doesn't give you that ability to return early or to extend later.
So Steve, does it give you the chance to be like a day trader? If you see a car that has good resale values, you've got a lot on fleet, you can see an opportunity with purchase price versus resale that you'll move some of those?
Absolutely. Taking into account that you've got the manufacturer to consider. So most manufacturers would, protect their dealer base and their demonstrator stock, so they wouldn't like us selling at 2 or 3 months old. So we predominantly wouldn't sell under 6 months. But absolutely, once you hit that 6-month mark, any vehicles for sale.
And Steve, what are the main sort of challenges for corporate and franchisees in the sort of role of acquisition and buyback?
So the biggest challenge for a franchise in the acquisition process is that the OEMs class the end user policy. So there has been some change of late, and some OEMs look at the group as a buying group as opposed to corporate v franchise. So a franchise predominantly wouldn't purchase a vehicle at the same price as the corporate entity. However, the corporate entity goes out and drums up the business on a national level, and the franchise has to transact at that agreed rate. So they're at a distinct disadvantage. So most of the work that we do with the manufacturers is around bringing them to the table as a buying group. Hasn't been 100% successful, but we've had some manufacturers come to the market and accept the franchisees as being part of the overall group.
And the question for me, Steve, in that area, because, and John's a very good question you asked around that whole OEM thing and the manufacturer expectation, but what about the dealers? What's a rental company's expectation of a dealer in this area?
So again, you've got two distinct ones, a franchise purchase and a corporate purchase. So from a corporate purchase, they're purely a delivery agent because they're getting a delivery fee to deliver for us. If you're a franchise buyer buying through your local dealer, then the dealer's getting a number against his target. He has a lot more value in that transaction. So it becomes a lot stronger partnership between the dealer and the franchise buyer at that point in time.
And as far as remarketing of it, like as far as the buybacks, you said dealers do buybacks, not OEMs. That expectation of our OEMs now gone. It's a dealer that will take that risk.
Yeah, I can't recall any of the major OEMs offering a buyback of any significance in the last probably 5-6 years. Yeah. So, but the dealers that do offer them, it comes with risk. There's been over a number of years where they're not there to fulfill their purchase option at the end. So you have to take that into consideration.
Is it a problem to get OEMs to supply to the rental market? Do they jump in and jump out, or are there ones that are regular, ones that you can trust from a supply perspective? And are there opportunities for OEMs to do something in there, or do you tend to get those that are always in and others that come and go out?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And part of my role over the last 18 odd years is talking to all the new staff members that come through any rental organisation and explaining to them that we don't have a line of OEMs lining up to provide cars to us. We typically sell as much to them as they sell to us, in that we have to go and structure a deal with that OEM to get the right fleet on at the right time, at the right price, to make our business models work. In terms of who plays and who doesn't play, every year we would talk to every OEM in the marketplace. Traditionally, there have been some players that play every year and will continue to play every year and are experienced in that area and underpin the bulk of the rental car fleets out there. And then you do have the ones that come in and come out, and typically it's to move stock, and you see the opportunist buy in that area. I tend to like an OEM that's got to play for multiple years, because you want to protect the resale value of those cars, because regardless of what you buy up front, if you drop that resale, your holding cost has dropped. Sorry, increased rather than dropped. And your whole financial model falls apart. So you need someone that's going to be around, that's going to support their product and not come in and out of the market, because you want that backup support. You want the market there. You don't want the deep discounting. You want a strong manufacturer that's providing vehicles this year, next year, and next 5-10 years. So, and you know, you look at the major manufacturers that we've had in this country, some that have passed and no longer with us, but you know, they've always underpinned the car rental fleets. You know, the Toyotas, the Fords, the General Motors in the past, Mitsubishi and Nissan, the majors, and then you supplement your fleets with the others. That's got to change, because we're going to see more and more imports, as you know, and you got to see, you know, the likes of Volkswagen, Honda, Mazda, and all that perhaps participating in that space.
Steve, can you tell us about what are the biggest problems to be a rent-a-car operator as far as theft and damage, etc.?
Yeah, well, theft is prevalent, and our ID verification is probably one of the most important parts of our process to ensure that the customer standing in front of you is representing the correct person. We would always operate on a basis of and planning our fleet that somewhere between 5 to 10 cars every month and just not coming back. And the stronger, and I think technology's got to play a really good part in this down the track, in that, you know, when we get in telematics into every vehicle in the fleet, you got to stop a lot of that theft. But currently, there are pieces of the community that look upon car rental as an easy target. So we continually update our processes to make sure that that customer is who they're representing. It is a big part of the industry, something that we talk with our industry body, Ep4, about collectively, about how we can strengthen that, the theft, and not only the theft, like it's the theft at the counter, but it's also the theft in our car parks. So we've had car parks broken into at airports. They run through multiple car parks. We have people then just turning up with, you know, fake IDs, picking vehicles up, and they're very good fake IDs today. So there's so much of it going on, and it has a big cost bearing each month, each year on each car rental operator. So the more we can do in that space. So think about it from a police perspective, is that you go and report a car stolen, and they go, so how was it stolen? Well, I actually gave the customer the keys. So how did he steal it? We didn't return it. Well, it's just not returned yet. It's overdue. So most police jurisdictions make us wait 72 hours before we report a car stolen.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm.
And a question I was going to ask also is international drivers flying in, used to driving left-hand drive. They've been on an aeroplane for 24 hours, haven't slept well. They step off a plane, they jump in a car, Sydney Airport, and drive up to the Central Coast, or they fly into Melbourne, drive down the Great Ocean Road. Is the left-hand drive, right-hand drive situation a problem for damage?
Yeah, it is. And a lot of work's being done in the rental industry around that. In New Zealand, they have questionnaires that they have to pre-fill in order to get their vehicle. We've worked with Ep4 here. We've also worked independently with translating our terms and conditions into different languages. We've also got some safe driving booklets. We've also worked with industry bodies. I think it was the Mandarin community in producing booklets for the Chinese New Year a couple of years ago to help and assist those drivers when they're landing in the country. It's a big thing, and a lot of politicians are really keen to see the industry come together and provide more tuition around that during the rental phase to make sure that the customer is safe when they leave, because it is a big problem. Yeah.
Steve, in terms of rideshare and car share, where does this fit in with the traditional model of rental?
Yeah, it's interesting there. So most rideshare companies now have a marketplace where we participate and we do offer rentals to the drivers. Most drivers that got into rideshare early realised quite early in the piece that the number of kilometres they were putting on their vehicles were diminishing their value. So they looked at other options and how they can get a vehicle to perform that service. So if you go onto, say, Uber Marketplace, you'll see most rental car companies sitting on that marketplace offering rentals to Uber drivers. And similar happens with many of the others.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting thing, because I think a lot of the Uber drivers, especially when they started, underestimated the actual costs of running a car, and so they didn't take all those back-end costs into account until they had to come up and sell their vehicle.
That's absolutely correct. And the other piece you need to consider is the CTP insurance in the States, where you purchase that separately, and it has to be on what we call a hire and drive basis as opposed to business private. So if mum and dad goes into an Uber style arrangement, their vehicle could potentially be underinsured on that compulsory third party insurance, whereas a rental car is overinsured on that.
Well, it's an interesting trap, isn't it, that a lot of unsuspecting people can get caught out with. Now, Steve, I'm keen to ask a question just while we're on that subject is, where do you see the future? Like the market's been changing, so that we've been on this trajectory of change for a while. Where do you see the future of car rental and subscription and rideshare all in that one space? Because it seems to be sort of crossing over, where some rental is being provided for rideshare, but also I think one of your organisations, you even had a car share model as well. That was a sort of a spin-off from your days at Hertz, where you actually had car share on the streets.
Yeah.
So where do you see the future of those industries and the rental business, given that there's some disruptors here?
Yeah, so in 2018, car rental was 100 years old, and we still do exactly the same transaction as we did 100 years ago, with the exception that we've all been playing in the subscription car, the car share models, and where that's going. We would ask ourselves every day, every week, who's going to own the motor vehicle? How's it going to be owned? How's it going to be transacted? So where we saw the future and where I see the future moving forward is within that subscription car, but also in that seamless car transaction, so that you bypass counters, you go straight to a car, or you could have the cars positioned at a workplace that you simply go via an app and you go and pick your vehicle for the day for the travel that you need to do. It could extend into buying plans for a subscription car service, or we could be providing cars to, through multiple outlets, through the back end of motor dealers, through partnerships with other companies. It's quite a complex scenario where it's all going, and the subscription car is probably where I think it's going to land. Everyone's investing heavily in that. You see most websites today have a subscription car offer of some sort. And I think that mobility piece being tied into that, the seamless car, I think you still got to land on an aeroplane and need to pick a car up when you travel. So that subscription car may or may not work for that. You may have an option to change your car multiple times during the year that you could use for that. But I still think the daily rental will persist for some time, but you'll bring in the car share will probably get more prevalent. And then the subscription car model for the new generation of children coming through, I think they will flock to it like they do to the mobile phone plans and take plans on subscription car as opposed to owning a $20,000 or $30,000 piece of depreciating asset.
Steve, what role will innovation play in the car rental business post COVID-19? Do you think there's going to be big changes in the industry?
Absolutely. I think we've all been, and I mentioned seamless car earlier, talking about seamless car, and that's moving the customer straight from the plane, straight to the car park, straight into the car without any contact with a person, and then driving out with all the new ID verification processes in place today. The telematics that can go into vehicles, the open and close function in that, and linking that back via the system, the rental system that we utilize, I think will bypass counters, which will help with COVID-19. Obviously, there will be no interface with the staff at the counter. I think staff in the car park will become more relevant and will be the point where you meet the customer on rental exit and on rental entry. So, but yeah, absolutely. I think that technology is certainly going to play a big part post COVID-19. And some operators have it now, some are working on it. Some are challenged at the moment with the industry and may defer that technology for a period of time, but I expect that we're going to see it en masse throughout 2021.
And Steve, given that we're talking COVID-19 and some of the specific challenges that are coming up, because there are plenty for everybody, and it's interesting, the car rental business has been hit pretty hard as well. Are there any examples overseas as far as trends as to how car rental has changed and what they're already doing about it?
Yeah, so the biggest one I can reflect on is China, and I had a conversation with a gentleman last week who was saying that his franchisees in China, since they've opened up travel within China, some of his franchisees over there are now back at 90% utilization rates already.
Wow.
I don't expect we're going to see that for a long time in Australia, but yeah, they're certainly experiencing that, and other parts of Asia currently. So
90% utilization rate.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. So, and I think a lot of that comes from the population not wanting to get on public transport. So
Right.
they're trending back towards rental car for that purpose and that social distancing.
Wow. So what would a normal rental car operator run at as far as utilization here? What percentage?
There's always two percentages that are talked in car rental terms. One's financial utilization and one is operational utilization. So, and there's generally about a 10% gap in those, because if you imagine you run a fleet of 1,000 cars, you've got to have, 10% of those are out of service for damaged, stolen, wrecked, or they're in a maintenance state, or typically being cleaned. So you've got to get your utilization out of 90% of your fleet. So on a financial basis, which is the measure I always used, if you could run in your high 70s, you were doing a very good job.
Wow. So if you got to 80, that would be a really good benchmark.
Absolutely. And at peak times, you go well over the 80s, but then you have those non-peak times where you do run well under those 75s. So,
right. So it's customer driven, the demand, for example, in China for having their own vehicle, which is driving that utilization up. Is the industry doing anything differently?
Not that I'm aware of, apart from promoting themselves as available. So,
as far as the industry here, what were some of the immediate actions that the rental big guy, the corporates, were doing, and what are the franchisees doing?
Yeah, so the franchisees did look to the corporates for guidance there. So the initial reaction to COVID-19, and if you can imagine, you're running at your highest utilization to March 11, and then straight after that, you could see the drop. And the immediate actions were cancel orders. Any forward orders were cancelled with manufacturers. We went straight into a sales process on selling what fleet we could. You then went into making sure that the cars were safe, your assets were safe on the ground, they were locked and in a safe space, because they do attract thieves around airports. We went into deregistering motor vehicles en masse. So states like Tasmania and South Australia gave us the ability to deregister and leave the plates on, so that when the business does return, it's a nice, simple process. We fueled and cleaned cars and parked them up so that when business does return, you're ready to roll again. So that process happened, and you can imagine every car rental operator doing that at once, the used car market dried up. So then we went into what else can we do? So every operator now has a healthcare offering out there, which is fantastic for the community, free car rentals for anyone in the healthcare industry. Some are charging a minimal rate, some are giving them for free. And then we looked at longer term rentals, any sort of special we can get to get vehicles moving. But if you imagine from March 11th running at 80% utilization to March 30th running at 20%, there's a lot of idle vehicles sitting around the country that are hitting that used car market.
So you're saying before there's over 100,000 renter cars in Australia. So that
yeah,
the utilization drops, you start selling some, you idle others, you cancel forward orders.
Yep.
And do you extend leases? If you've got a lease, do you extend those out?
Yeah, so we need to come back and talk a little bit about franchise because it's slightly different. But yeah, leases are extended, or the period of keep is, I'd rather refer to it, gets extended, because if we go back to the GFC crisis where typically a car rental would, maximum keep of a passenger vehicle would be 2 years. We went out to 3 years. Well, that's certainly the case now, that we would look at keeping cars to 3 years. Let's go back and look at the franchise network. They're not impacted as much as the corporate locations that operate at airports. The franchise network has that local business, the insurance replacement work. Whilst there wasn't as many cars, or there isn't as many cars on the road today as there was pre-COVID, there's still panel work being done and there's still replacement cars being required. So where an airport was down anywhere between 95 and 98%, in the local areas, they're only seeing drops of around 40%. So they still had a viable business model to run forward, providing they got their costs out. And then we should look at, say, a regional area like the Pilbara, where that hasn't stopped. They're still mining. So the demand up there is still very strong.
So really it comes down to where the demand is derived from. Our small suburban locations are still okay.
Yeah.
They've had a bit of a drop, but nowhere near as big a hit as what the airports have hit. And if you are a B2B based business, then you will still have good continuity, because those vehicles are long-term rentals and the mining's going ahead, the agriculture's going ahead, and there's other certain industries that are still working. So there still is demand and those returns are maintained.
That's correct. And one of the segments that has continued is that solar and wind farms out in regional Australia. Like we've seen a fair bit of that work coming through as well. So that's been very good during this period.
A question as far as threats to the rental business. Would it be fair to say then that obviously tourism is a big threat if you're talking about airports, and air travel restrictions, domestic and international? What other threats do you see in that space?
Okay, so obviously the air travel is a big threat because it does bring the majority of the business to our major locations. So whilst we fully expect that international travel won't return in the next 12 to 18 months to where it was previously, that's going to have a huge impact on the industry. Domestic travel, depending which premier you listen to, whether it's going to be July or it's going to be September. Hopefully it's July, because if that returns, then you could easily think that we'd get back to 60% of where we were. But if that doesn't return to September, it's going to drag things out longer. So I'm hoping that they don't hold us to ransom and they all get together and work an opening of the domestic travel market so that some of these tourism businesses can get back off the floor and start bringing some of their staff back and their people on board. The other threats obviously are going to be those disruptors as they continue with the subscription car. There's a number of them out there. They're always going to exist, but it's how we play in that field and how we change the way that we do car rental to coexist with them as well. So,
Steve, airports play a big role. How do you think they need to change in the future to still maintain a big share of that market?
Great question. So they have a monopolistic nature about them in that aircraft have to land there. They bring our passengers there. I think there is a strong need for them to look at their charging models, on how they push their charging models down to car rental operators. There is a point in time where the customer is going to say, I'd rather go off airport than rent from the airport, because of the premium location surcharge that we all impose to recover the costs that the airport impose on each operator. It's at a point now where I do not think the market can sustain any further increases, and they do need to look at that, and they need to have the customer at heart when they're doing that. You can't expect mum and dad that fly to Cairns to be paying a premium location surcharge in excess of 20%. I think it's way more than that, on top of their rental dollar, when they could go downtown and pick that car up without that surcharge. So their model needs to change, and they'll have more people renting, I think, if they do.
Steve, for a dealer, so as a country dealer, looking at this presentation at the moment, are there any opportunities for them if they want to grow their volume and to get it into the rental business? Are there any tips or advice you would give them on how they should go about it or what they should look at?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number that we've worked with over many years. There are dealer groups that do own franchises within car rental space. There are country dealers that do have agencies as well with car rental operators. It's about making the inquiry, talking to the car rental organisation about how they could partner with them. There are PMA restrictions around dealers, and also franchisees have similar area restrictions, so they need to be thought through. But absolute opportunity for them to have stock in there and to run rental businesses as a complementary business to their current dealerships.
And Steve, question for me, as far as supply, because when we saw GFC, and you mentioned GFC before, and there was a lot of learnings from that, and I know you were you were steering a very big ship through the GFC when you're at Hertz. The fleet management side of it, extending leases or extending retention periods. Do you feel that there is a potential that there's going to be, like there's some supply now where a lot of rental organisations are defleeting or they're parking cars, but when the demand comes back on, do you feel that there may be a limited supply of used cars coming back into the market towards the back end of this year?
Possibly. There's a couple trains of thought here. The GFC didn't see a drop of 80% of business in Australia. It certainly had a drop, but nowhere near the magnum that we're talking about now. So currently there is a lot of idle fleet, way more than we ever had during the GFC. I think moving forward, you will see, as car rental operators extend their period of keep, a drying up of those cars coming back to the market, but that may take to later this year, early next year for that to eventuate. There's going to be a period now between now and possibly September where some of those operators that aren't at airports may still experience a drop-off, because a lot of the manufacturing businesses out there, which are bringing forward manufacturing currently, going along really strongly. Some of the guys I talk to, there's no order book coming in. So there's going to be a point in time where they drop off. So there may be a lag in what's happened today that may affect some of those smaller operators further down the track. And they've all extended leases or taken holiday periods on their motor vehicle fleet. They've taken JobKeeper for their staff. That's all got to come back in September, and they've got to repay those loans. So we just need to be mindful that there could be another influx coming through before we see that period where we extend cars into that 36-month mark, which really we won't see till next year.
Steve, part of what we've spoken about is that you mentioned the defleeting of some of the vehicles, and we think there might be a shortage of low mileage used vehicles for dealers. Is there still any opportunity if dealers went out there looking for some of those defleeted vehicles? Would they still, or has that process already finished?
No, it's ongoing. It'll be ongoing for the foreseeable future. So there is plenty of low kilometre car rental stock available in the market today. I would expect that no dealer would have any issue buying en masse what they require today.
So your recommendation is get in contact with your local rental organisation, disposals manager, and grab some stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting just looking at some of the car sales data, and car sales have a very good webcast, which rivals ours. That doesn't rival, complements, I should say. They had a really good one yesterday where they showed the clicks and the views are up, and specifically in the used car space. So a question I was keen to ask you is, what's the average sell price for a used rent-a-car?
Okay. Without disclosing too much,
with 1,000, is it? Are you defleeting 1-year-old cars at say 35 grand?
Yeah,
or
that's
is it
something.
25 grand.
And that's the other piece we didn't really talk about is the average age of the fleet and where it is. So, yeah, look, I always worked on the premise that the cars coming off fleet owed 15,000 as a guide. All right, that gives you a reasonable average of the fleet that you're disposing, and they're anywhere from 6 months to 24 months old. And that encompasses your $40,000 SUV to your $12,000 small compact car. Now, those prices post-COVID, well, in COVID, I should say, have dropped anywhere from 10+%. So it's a fair drop in a very short period of time. So if you run 1,000 cars at $15,000 on average, and you drop 10%, it's quite a lot of money, and it adds up quickly. So,
Steve, a question I'd like to ask is around electric vehicles. Have you seen any demand for that? Do you think there's going to be a future of electric vehicles for rental cars?
I absolutely see a future for it. I think with the technology that's going to come through with electric cars, for those metropolitan areas, I see it as a real opportunity moving forward, as I do with the hybrid fleets that are coming through as well. But I can see that transition through. Most rental car fleets now would have a good percentage of hybrids on their fleet. And I would think every one of us would be looking at, when do we get into electric in a reasonable fashion with good quantities of those vehicles. We'll also change the way that a rental's transacted, because when you rent a car and you've got the fuel options that you can buy, when you go and rent an electric vehicle, will it be just a package deal? You know, do you just return it, whatever charges on it? I'd imagine that it's going to be an almost a package, one price per day, no added extras. It's going to be quite interesting to see how it is packaged up when it is packaged up. Yeah.
And then going on from electric vehicles, autonomous cars. I know that's quite a long way off. You know, people are talking 5 to 10 years that you'll start to get autonomous cars coming through any volume. Do you think that will have a big impact on rental companies based at airports, or because then the vehicle could come down and pick you up as you required it, and you could be located quite far from the airport?
If the airport provides a road infrastructure that would work with that, absolutely. We did trial that Tesla probably back in 2017. For a couple of years there, and that was purely an exercise to show that we're confident with the technology. Is it going to be mainstream? It will be at some point in time, and when that is going to be the key. And how you integrate that into a national brand, and having autonomous vehicles in those city locations, and then obviously having your traditional car rental in the remote and country locations as well. And those cars have got to be affordable too. Yeah.
And do you get customers asking for certain types of cars? I know you've got a lot of high-end cars that you use in the rental fleet as well. So it's not just the base model. So is that in fact, that's a very good question. Is it just the base model that you buy for rental, or do you mix it up a bit?
Yeah, so a couple of questions in that. So do we get customers asking us for a specific style of car? Absolutely, and colour. You know, a lot of weddings, we want white. Okay, well, we can never guarantee that because you never know what car's going to get damaged or which car's going to be returned late. So you never guarantee a colour. But in terms of a customer specifying a car, if you have a look at any website with any of the car rental operators, they'll say Nissan X-Trail or similar, or Toyota Camry or similar. And that's purely because we may buy in different mixes. So that covers that question off. In terms of the specification, so again, it's a holding cost question. So, you know, does the base model, what you buy it for, what you sell it for after you hold it, does that, what is that holding cost differential between that? Is it better to go to a mid-range and get a higher resale value and lower your monthly holding costs? Yes, you pay a little bit more in interest because of the purchase price, but your depreciation could be a lot less. So every time you look at a model, you look at 2 or 3 different variants in that model and select the best one, the best fit.
And is this where the dealers then have input in with the buyback? You mentioned dealers taking a buyback position. Do they sort of steer you in a certain direction?
I wouldn't say on specifically the buyback, but certainly on the wholesale end of the transaction. I think most rental car companies would be talking to their dealer networks, their wholesale networks about what's X model going to be worth at the end. What if I bought the next model up in that range? Would that return me a better holding cost? That would happen every year with every car rental operator.
And the auction houses, do they have input or give you guidance as to what's hot, what's not?
Yeah, absolutely. So auction houses in a remarketing strategy, whether you've got retail, semi-retail through a fixed price at an auction house, pure auction, traditional wholesale, you need your auction house because they sell multiple cars. They've got access to good data. I know in the past, the companies I've worked with, we've shared data with auction houses and get the combined data back so that we can compare against the market as well. Absolutely critical tool to planning and looking at your holding costs for your fleet overall.
So what would you say are the three key issues and opportunities for the rental business now, post-COVID, and going forward?
Okay, post-COVID, I think the 3 key areas are going to be being nimble and agile to take advantage of any space or any opportunity that comes up in the rental space. The second piece I would say is to embrace technology, because I think it's going to have a twofold effect. It's going to make the car rental experience a lot more pleasant, a lot more seamless, but it's also going to provide an inherent safety mechanism for the customer and for the staff members. So that technology is part of it. It brings safety through to it. And then making sure that, going back to that nimbleness, is having those experienced operators that can actually implement those plans and see those plans through and not make mistakes that have been made previously. So that's going to be critical to any car rental operator out there, be it franchise or corporate.
So would it be fair to say, if I were to summarize these, that point 1 is be nimble and agile for when the opportunities do come on, and they will. The second is to embrace the technology to improve the customer experience and the safety. When you mentioned about the deskless or the counterless experience, you come off the plane, you just go in, unlock your car remotely, and away you go. And the third one is make sure the people that you have, it's a people business still, that the people in your business, they learn, they do study the mistakes of the past, but also are nimble and can apply their new technologies into the future with their plans, but maintain that planning process. Would that be right?
Absolutely. And from the people perspective, you know, you may not be front counter now, but you might be car park attendants. They'll be equally important. So there may be a changing of the guard depending on how that seamless technology flows through.
There'd be in light of what's happened with Hertz globally, will there be a rationalization in the rental car business, or will there be a fragmentation where there'll be lots of smaller people, operators?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Hertz Australia is a strong organisation, and I'm confident that they will survive. But what it might provide is opportunity for others to take pieces of market share here and there, all coming back to being agile and nimble when you come back from COVID. Where it will rationalise is the second tier markets. Those not so strong companies that operate off airport and that, I do see a rationalisation there. And I do see some of those that may not survive this period at all, as I do with some of the franchises. If they're not looking at their business daily, they're not looking at how they're going to return, there may be some franchises that struggle towards the end.
Now, Kai, I'm keen for your feedback on this conversation, because I dare say this would be fairly new for you as far as how the rental business works.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you guys were talking at the start, and there were just stuff that I'd never even considered throughout that conversation. Like the talk about electric vehicles, or when you mentioned all the cars sitting at the airport, Steve. That was really news to me. Like I'd never really thought about what happens to those cars. Like I just kind of figured that they'd go elsewhere somehow, maybe just drive themselves off.
It's interesting. We do what we call a physical inventory every morning on our fleet. It takes a hell of a lot longer today because you've got, Melbourne Airport might have 700 idle cars for Thrifty, but Hertz will have 1,500, and Avis will have 1,500, and Europcar will have 500-600, and Red Spot 200 or 300. But they're all in the same paddock, and you've got to go and check everyone's there. I remember the guys going out to Melbourne Airport a couple of weeks ago and checking a Pajero. It was there, but its wheels weren't. No.
What are your thoughts on the three that Steve mentioned?
There are a couple of points that were really interesting for me. One was the selling, because I always thought the rental cars had a stronger position than the company selling to them. But he says it's equal selling back and forth, and that they want companies to be long-term selling to them. And that was, to me, was really interesting from a OEM perspective.
Renault, with Justin and myself,
Yeah.
We were in rental and we grew the business on the back of logical rental exposure, but doing it consistently.
Yeah.
You can't jump in and jump out. It's actually bad. You're then just seen as a pants dropping brand that you're only coming to us for a booty call.
Yeah.
Whereas what Toyota, now Mitsubishi's a long-termer.
Yeah.
Ford was a long-termer.
Mercedes.
But Toyota is a long-termer. Yeah. And Benz and now BMW are long-termers, where they know they in their business plans, they say, we're going to put 5% of our volume or 1% of our volume through the rental channel. And this is going to be the price we're going to sell it at. The rental company then has continuity of supply, and then the rental company ends up marketing your product to customers, and you get a whole heap of extended test drives. When you look at what he was saying about the average length of a rental, 4 days for corporates during the week, and if you're a crash replacement, you're talking 3 weeks. So that's a pretty long road test. So if you're getting your brand out there and you're steady with supply, then it's a good thing. But it's the brands that are in, out, and they curse the rental organisations, saying that they just got to drop their pants and don't like it. Well, it's like, do rental, do it properly, be committed to it, but then limit what you do.
It must be a key part of your strategy, and you must have proper process around it to make it really work. So to me, that was the one important point. The second point that I sort of think is the opportunity for dealers to maybe get in and do rental as an additional part to his business to create additional revenue.
What's interesting, because Steve didn't actually say that. To get to that statement, if we reference what Steve was saying, airports are the domain of the corporates, and they've dropped almost 80-90%. The rental franchisees have only dropped 30%. So there still is a need for those cars out in the field. And he mentioned that agencies dealers should work to be agents in the rental space. So there's an opportunity for the dealers definitely to do something with some renter cars in their local areas.
Because you can supply the parts to the repair shops. There's a whole lot of stuff around there. So to me, that was very interesting. The third part, which I was quite fascinated, is about the breakup of the different segments and how little buyback was. I always thought buyback was a far bigger percentage. And he said only 5%. And that was a really good point.
And the reason for that is the agility side of it.
Yeah.
They need the agility to be able to defleet when they can, when the market determines it to be defleeted, as opposed to having cars on buyback. Because right now, if you had buybacks and you're a rental operator, it'd be killing you because you still have to pay the $400 or $500 a month for that car just to sit there. You can't get rid of it because you're locked into a buyback agreement. So This is why they like it to be at risk. They can just say, dump these cars and let's just right size our fleet.
Are there any other points that you thought on your side?
I think it's interesting, his points about being agile, and that agility is all about defleeting, but also being able to put cars on. I'm still not sure that I'm of the view that the industry is going to run out of cars.
Yeah,
there's not going to be. Yeah. I think if he's selling 700 cars last month, or he sold 700 cars when he normally sells 600, that's only an extra 100 cars more than normal. And if they didn't buy in March, it's the purchases that would have happened in March that happened in April and a little bit. But then it's going to continue on. They're going to run out of cars. They'll defleet. When the airports come back on, they'll need to use their cars. They will have extended them for longer. There's not going to be the stock, and they won't be able to get stock from OEMs because OEMs are going to say, we've got no money to give to renter cars, so we're going to just give our cars to our retail customers because they're going to come back on stream, and there's going to be a shortage.
Both for used cars and new cars, because they're not going to be putting back. So that's going to dry up for dealers too, who are used to having these through the auction houses and that. So thanks very much for listening to us today. We enjoyed our discussion. If you liked what you heard, please follow us, and we look forward to talking to you next week. If you have any ideas or recommendations of what we can do, we'd love to hear it. Please do that. Thank you.